My husband worked as a government contractor for a company that sends him all over the world. For a few years, my daughter and I would travel with him. He was usually gone for months at a time. One of his business trips was to Bremerton, Washington. We were put into an apartment called Olympic Village. It was rented out to companies like his. They were okay, fully furnished, better than a hotel, especially for that length of time that we usually stayed. The apartment we had was on the ground floor. It was decorated well, and the furniture wasn't too worn. Nothing seemed or felt weird. I usually can read vibes of places where I go. I'm not sure how to explain it. I don't think I'm psychic, just maybe in tune with my surroundings. Things seemed pretty normal for the first few days. I spent most days there since I didn't have a car, just playing my video games or watching TV. One night, my husband came home to the apartment, and I had dinner ready and set out. We all sat down at the table to eat, having the normal conversations people do, like how was work type stuff, when all of a sudden, I felt something touch my thigh. I didn't respond to it because I wasn't sure exactly what had just happened, so I continued eating. A few moments later, it happened again. It felt familiar, like my old 10-pound chihuahua was begging for food. I looked down, thinking I would see a dog looking up at me, but there wasn't anything there. My instinct had been to move him down with my hand to get him to stop begging. I laughed out loud and said to my husband, "I keep feeling like there's a dog here." I felt something jump at my leg, and I almost pushed it down. My husband said, "That's weird, because I feel like there's one here too." He told me he was on his way to the bathroom around 3 a.m. As soon as he walked out and turned to walk down the hall, he saw a small shadow sitting there, still, just looking at him. He jumped back, startled, and it disappeared. I was in shock because I didn't expect anyone to feel the same thing. It seemed weird. I'm very connected to animals. I've always been, my whole life. Dogs and I seem to have a very deep bond, almost on a spiritual level. About a week later, it was a weekend, and my husband and I were watching TV. We were both on our own couch. Mine was the large sofa, so I was stretched out under a blanket. Almost without any thinking, I went to readjust my position. In the moment, I thought my dog was laying at the crease of the back of my knee, where my legs bent. I was being careful to not squash him or move him because I felt a weight on the blanket. I looked, and nothing was there. I felt weird. I told my husband what had happened. Everything was normal for a while after that. I hadn't felt the dog since the couch. One night, I woke up and had to go to the bathroom. I'm night blind and wear glasses, but I decided to just go without putting them on. The bathroom had a window, and a light from outside shined through, with just enough light that I could see once I got close and around the corner. So I headed down the hall, sliding my hand slowly across the wall so I could feel where to go. I was looking straight ahead, but it was pitch black. I came to the corner, with my hand still tracing the side, and I see something. It was darker than the dark hall, but the darkness blocked the light from the window. The light traced a body. Its height brought my head to look instinctively up, towards where a face would be. I froze in terror, gasped, and jumped back, scared because I thought it was a real person. Where the head would be, it looked like he was wearing a top hat. This dark figure seemed to be close to 6'5" or taller. Once I realized it wasn't human, I quickly rushed past it to turn on the bathroom light. With the light on, I then saw that nothing was there. Years later, I brought this up to my daughter. I didn't want to tell her before because she was still little, and she shared with me that she's also seen a man there who would stand in the corner with a big hat and a dog at his feet. I've always been interested in the paranormal and witnessed and experienced some events that I can't explain to this day, but I'm a very rational person, so I've always brushed it off, while keeping an open mind, of course. but one of those experiences left me with no doubt. My current girlfriend used to work at a cafe bakery in an old building in Bordeaux. She used to close at night alone because she was the store manager and stayed after the crew was done to count the register, do all the paperwork, etc. The bakery was made of the storefront, the kitchen in the back, and the office in the back as well. There's also a second floor, which is only storage and the changing rooms for the staff. The building isn't shared. It was only the cafe/bakery. She told me she felt uneasy as soon as her first shift there. Most nights, she'd hear running footsteps upstairs, the TVs in the sitting area for the customers turning on and off randomly, and the front door's doorbell ringing while the door was not moving. All that when she was alone. Another coworker she was close with shared the same experiences with her. I believed her because she has a history of paranormal encounters and is very serious about that stuff, but I wasn't convinced until I witnessed it. I also worked in the food industry, so I was rarely off when she was working too. One Sunday, I was off, so I decided to come pick her up and spend the last 30 to 45 minutes of her workday she usually spends alone with her this time. She gave me a tour of the place, and it did feel uneasy, but nothing significant happened, except for some random rattling noises upstairs, until I mentioned how quiet her ghost of the bakery was. She was counting the register in the office, in the back of the store. I was leaning against the wall in the corridor leading to the office, my back turned away from the storefront. To my right, there was a dishwashing room. There was no door to this room, just an opening in the corridor. To better visualize, I was facing towards the office watching my girlfriend, turning my back to the storefront, leaning against the wall, but seeing the dishwashing room in my peripheral vision. Jokingly, I tell her, "I'm glad your ghost decided to leave us alone tonight." Not 1 second after I finish my sentence, the pile of glasses and dishes in the dishwashing room goes flying. I saw the whole room clearly in my side vision, and there was no one or nothing that could have done that. There was a pile of glasses stacked up in a pyramid, and they flew as if someone ran their hand through the base. It wasn't one glass tipping and bringing down the pyramid. It was legit pushed off. She just told me, "I told you, he's always there," since she's used to stuff like this happening. She was almost done, so we stayed less than 10 minutes in there, but I could feel a different level of oppression and uneasiness for the whole time. This one sticks with me because there's no rational explanation. I saw the dishes go flying around, and it was a direct response to my joke. I live in South India. I still do, and this one gives me nightmares. In India, as you may know, we're highly superstitious and religious. It was when I was 7 or 8 years old that my dad moved into a new rented home. My relatives were urging my dad to buy it, but my mom was reluctant, hence we never bought it, and I'm so grateful for that. I was a kid, and I didn't know very much about paranormal stuff. I faintly remember that we used to hang up a rectangular mirror in our hall, and one night, while I was passing that mirror, I saw my sister coming behind me in the mirror. She was just 3 years old or so at the time, and I wanted to lift her up, so I turned back and was so excited to lift her when I noticed she wasn't there. I ran back to Mom in the kitchen and asked her where my sister was. She was like, "I put her to bed." I persisted that she woke up, so she took me to our bedroom since her and I use the same room, and she was sleeping as my mom said. Later one night, I don't remember the date precisely, my dad had gone to work and it was 7 p.m. My mom was frying fish and I was having my dinner while watching Tom and Jerry when we sensed a burning smell coming out of the bedroom. My sister was with me at that time, so Mom rushed out to see, and I followed behind. We noticed that our washing machine caught fire. We had kept our washing machine in that bathroom as it was huge and spacious. See, a few of you may think it's a machine error or some problem with the electricity. I remember my mom screaming at the brand manager of the washing machine, saying that there was no electricity problem. So we got it checked too, and the servicemen told us that there was nothing wrong with the washing machine, and it anonymously caught fire. So back to the story. The machine caught fire, and it blasted. We ran out of the house, and fire engines and ambulances started to pull up, with a number of neighbors standing outside. Thankfully, with the grace of God, we got out safe. After a few years since we moved to a new apartment, my mom was telling a very close neighbor about how our previous home caught fire, and I was curious to listen, so I sat beside her as she told her experience. 4 or 5 days before the washing machine caught fire, my mom had brought some groceries and stocked it in the refrigerator. The next day, all the lemons and eggs, specifically, had rotten, and my mom had an ominous feeling about it. And then our house caught fire. Now, traveling back to when we recently moved into the house, my mom used to put incense sticks at the nook of the house. As you see, it wards out the evil spirits and stuff. We had stairs, which we would take to the rooftop. And my mom never goes up to put incense sticks there after the sun sets, because one day it literally gave her the creeps while she went to place it there, and she came running back down. After we shifted, my dad used to go out of the country for businesses, so we were alone. At that time, Mom would pray to God at night in the prayer room we had in our home. When she prayed, she'd hear someone walking or running in the rooftop, or sometimes a sense or feeling that someone walked or ran past the prayer room. We never felt happy in that house. We'd always find glass shattered at the backside of the home and had to call people to clear it out. In the front of the house, we used to have these drumstick trees that belonged to a neighbor of ours. And since I told you we're superstitious, 'tis said that a house isn't supposed to have drumsticks, as it is said that creatures of the dark used to reside there. This one applies for tamarind trees as well, and Mum thought that'd be a reason as well. We tried to talk about the history of the house to the owner, and the owner suspiciously tried to talk it away or change to other subjects. We also had a small temple adjacent to our home, which held a goddess Durga idol, which my mom says had protected us until the last minutes we left the house. That Durga idol was stolen a week prior to the house fire. We lived in that house for a year or so, and Mom states that it was the goddess who protected us and tried to warn us of that house. Now, I have heard that the house has now been renovated into an apartment. I hope the people residing there are all right. We never took a single belonging of ours from that house, as most of it was burnt away, including our picture frames, and we had to burn the remnants that we could collect. It still gave me creeps while writing this story. I've never shared this story with anyone. I was always too afraid to be judged for it, so it's something I buried down until my friend brought it up the other day. We both have daughters, and we're talking about how we could educate them on being safe when they're teenagers and experimenting with partying. When my best friend and I were 17 years old, we went to the beach for spring break with a couple of our guy friends. My friend was talking to this guy she had met through mutual friends, and he wanted us to meet up with him at his house he and his friends had rented together. Our guy friends had ditched us to meet other girls, so we decided to go ahead and go to her friend's house to hang out with them. When we get there, it was the middle of the day, and he took us inside and introduced us to everyone. Turns out, almost all the guys were on a baseball team of the same university. We all hung out, and they were all drinking. My friends and I were not. One guy came out with 2 glasses of what appeared to be whiskey and Coke. Against my better judgment, I started to sip it, as did my friend. There was one guy who appeared not to be athletic, and he was the only person at the house who was not friendly towards us. I'll call him Mike. Suddenly, I started to feel very buzzed. We were laughing and talking, and one guy asked me to put on his jersey. I grabbed it and put it on over my clothes.
No, take off your clothes and put it on.
he said in an aggressive tone. I was feeling more tipsy at this point, and I knew something was very wrong. Our parents had let us drink with them multiple times. I knew what it was like to be drunk. I knew how much I could handle before I was drunk. And one drink never made me feel like I was getting wasted.
Quit babysitting that drink. Drink up, weakling,
the guy said as they all laughed. Even though I'd stopped drinking, I could still feel more and more buzzed, especially since our drink barely tasted of any whiskey. My dad always had whiskey at home, and we would drink a couple of whiskey Pepsis on occasion. I would feel relaxed, but this was much different. We should go. Our friends are waiting for us. I headed to the door, and a couple of guys stood in front of us.
No, you can't leave. Come sit down over here for a little bit.
As they ushered us back to the couch, this sinking feeling hit my gut, and I knew we were on borrowed time. Trying to stay calm, I laughed and said, I need a pee. Come with me. I grabbed my friend's hand, and we went to the restroom together. We both stood there, and we had already read each other's minds. I put my hands on her head and looked her in the eyes so we could both focus. We need to leave now. Our phones both had spotty service all over the island. I'm guessing because there were so many people packed on it. Take my keys. Tell them you're going to get your purse, and I'll stay here. You go get the guys and come back for me. I knew this plan probably wouldn't work, but my mind was going crazy. As I opened the bathroom door, Mike was standing there. My heart sank. He was rude to us earlier, and he probably heard us talking. Follow me and be quiet. Something inside me trusted him with everything I had in that moment. We followed him down the hallway to a garage and out to the front driveway. Hurry up and get out of here now. We ran to the car, and I drove off to our hotel. I remember driving, but I don't remember getting to our condo. The rest of the story is from our guy friends telling us what happened. Apparently, we walked in, and the guys asked us where we had been because it was already nighttime, and we were supposed to meet up to barbecue some weenies. They said we didn't say a word, just walked to our room and closed the door and passed out. We didn't come to till the next day, and both of us had excruciating headaches, as if we had drank a whole bottle of cheap vodka by ourselves. To the basketball douchebags who tried to take advantage of two teenage girls, let's never meet again, or I will kick you in the dick. And thank you, Mike. I wish I could thank you. I hope you're out there reading this, and you remember the brunette and blonde little girls you saved that day on the island. This happened a few years ago, but upon discovering this sub, it reminded me of that incident and I wanted to share. The year 2018, me and 3 other friends, we were all males in our early 20s, decided to travel to Bali for about a week, since it was cheap and we had the time, so why not? Our itinerary included sightseeing, trying local foods, mountain climbing, visiting bars at the beach, basically a typical vacation in Indonesia. It was honestly quite a surreal experience. The country is absolutely beautiful, and the food was amazing. The only issue I had about the trip were the locals. Drugs were really prominent there, especially mushrooms. The streets were filled with people dying to sell us their drugs. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. One dude even grabbed my arm because I ignored his 2-for-1 deal for a one-way trip to meet Jesus. I shrugged him off while my friends laughed it off, suggesting that I may be passing up a chance to meet our Lord and Savior. He looked rabid and frantic, like he was about to pounce on me like a dog diagnosed with rabies. I didn't feel too afraid, as we were confident that we could handle them, since half of them were not even sober. However, that is only the tip of the iceberg. The horror starts when we went back to our Airbnb for the night. We had an early day the next morning and were exhausted. The place was extremely cheap, and it didn't even have a proper locking mechanism for the door. It had 2 wooden doors, which swung inwards, and the only way to lock them was to wedge a wooden block through the holes mounted on the door. It was quite a primitive lock, but it gets the job done, I guess. Everything was going well until the last night of our trip, when we realized the wooden block was missing. We looked everywhere for it, but to no avail. I just figured that one of us must have misplaced it somewhere. We settled for using a selfie stick. I know, it sounds like a horrible idea. Instead, since we didn't have anything that fits the holes to wedge the door closed, we turned in for the night, seemingly not expecting anything, since we had already stayed there for 6 days, with no issues. I woke up to strange clicking sounds in the dead of night. I got out of my bed, and I thought maybe it was one of the guys, so I nonchalantly approached the noise. My friends were all sleeping, so I decided to investigate the cause of the noise. The ruckus seemed to be coming from the door, so I headed towards them, feeling extremely confused. Who could be at our doorstep at this time of night? I noticed the doors were slightly opened, and the selfie stick was horribly deformed. I peeked outside, and I saw 3 people staring through the gap between the doors. They were really close to the entrance, and were attempting to push the doors open. I yelled at them, questioning their intentions, as I noticed one of them was holding the wooden block. I was shocked and puzzled at the situation, as I recognized one of the men. He did the overall cleaning for the Airbnbs and pathways during the day, so there was no reason for him to be there at 3 a.m. The other dude asked if the wooden block belonged to us, as they allegedly found it outside of our Airbnb. I definitely smelled bullshit, as there was absolutely no reason to do that at 3 a.m. I called for my guys, and the 3 men immediately ran for it. I clued in the guys on the circumstances, and we stayed up until the morning came in case they tried anything funny. We decided to report to the reception about their employee, but the description I gave them were not synonymous with theirs. They told me the housekeepers they hired consists of only females in their late 30s and 40s. This sent shivers down our spines as we came to realize that we had let a complete imposter in and out of our rooms while we were out. Luckily, nothing important was lost, and we got out of that situation safely. I can't imagine what would have happened if I didn't wake up on that fateful night, as the doors were close to being opened. I was just grateful that it was our last night there. This happened to me last night. For reference, I live in a college town. I, 21 female, was walking down the sidewalk to enter my friend's apartment building at around 9 p.m., so it was dark out already. I had to park down the street a ways due to all the spots being filled up. As I approach her building, an older man, late 40s I'm guessing, wearing a wife beater and dirty jeans, steps in front of me, facing me, and gets very close to me while saying,
"Hey, baby."
I'm no stranger to the occasional harassment, so I quickly sidestep him and go on my way. To me, it seemed obvious he didn't live in the complex, since it's mostly occupied by 20-something-year-old undergrads. Now, in order to get to my friend's apartment, I have to take a smaller path to get to the back of the building. I was walking on that, and I didn't hear him behind me anymore. But as I entered the more unlit part, I looked behind me just to check. He was right behind me, not at a normal following distance. He was so close to me, I could reach out and touch him, and he had been walking fairly silently, as I hadn't been able to hear him, even though we were the only ones walking around. I'm scared shitless at this point. I see some people in front of me on the stairs, so I start running towards them into a more well-lit area. I was yelling, "I don't know you, please get away from me." I began to pull out my pepper spray while still running towards the onlookers who were still on the stairs. He got flustered and ran away, and I was able to contact my friend and get inside. Even though he had left, the people who had witnessed this all happen ended up not even saying a word to me and going back inside. I'm not sure what else they could have done at that point, but being alone while waiting for my friend to let me in made me feel incredibly unsafe. I held onto my pepper spray until I was completely inside the locked building. This is actually my stepmom and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me up to it a little more. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I, this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we're going to call her Macy, grew up as a kid of a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mom had moved their family over here to the States from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff. Hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots. You know, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space. But there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you ask my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily begrudgingly said okay. They would rest, and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walk down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools, geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road. And after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window, and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long, brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment he greeted them, her hackles went up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get in the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that was the point. It hit her. What a mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat, and 4 boxes of saran wrap, half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak out my stepmom, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16/17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on the little details. He was youngish, strong-looking, and had a foot on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack, log cabin-looking place. Right there, in a clearing of trees, there was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe was stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying,
"I'll be right back. Don't get out."
and he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exited the truck with her. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me. And they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and a public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. Lily was pissed off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, there was a big hatchet. It had dried red and brown stains, covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her shit, and seeing it, my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while, until Lily was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it, and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. The truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way, innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my mom to chill, and the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours, when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk across the twilight-lit lot. They watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they had even shut the doors. If this guy is still alive, he's really old, but still, let's not meet. So, about 9 years ago, my boyfriend, now husband, 44 male, and I, 40 female, were driving across country from California to Florida. My husband had an enormous Roddy named Kuma. It means bear in Japanese, and it fit. He was 110 pounds. I had only just met Kuma, maybe 2 days prior, since my husband and I were in a long-distance relationship at the time. So we, Kuma and I, didn't know each other well yet. But he was a great boy and talked a lot. We called them Umble Grumbles. We stopped at a gas station so that we could get out, stretch, and use the restrooms. He got Kuma on his leash and said he'd take him for a walk. I offered to do it instead, since I didn't need to use the restroom urgently. Now, I'm not a small girl. I'm 5'10", but I am petite, as my husband calls me, maybe 125 pounds. My husband is almost 6'5" and built like a Viking, So a dog Kuma's size wouldn't affect him one way or another if he tried to bolt, chasing a squirrel or something. I, on the other hand, will admit I was nervous once he handed me the leash to hold him, because if he decided to try anything, I wasn't big or strong enough to stop him. My husband noticed my nervousness. He just smiled and said, "Don't worry, he's well trained. He won't take off, and he won't let anything happen to you." It's important to note that Kuma had no formal protection training. He just loved whatever his dad did and knew he was supposed to protect and keep it safe when Dad wasn't there to do it himself. Once he was sure I was comfortable, my husband headed inside, leaving Kuma and I near the far right side of the gas station with a little dirt path near a wooded area. It was very dark, and there was little light being shed so far from the building. But it was a busy little station, and I could see people, so I didn't feel isolated or anything. So I start to walk slowly, allowing Kuma to take in his surroundings, when I hear a noise coming from behind me. I turn, startled, to see a man walking. He notices me and slows his gait, looks around, back at me, and then smiles eerily. Uh-oh. He changes direction suddenly, heading directly towards me. He says,
"It's awful dangerous out here alone. Are you alone?"
Something in his eyes told me to run. As I'm about to bolt and start hustling towards the people and lights of the station, I hear another sound. This one is new to me. As I clenched my hand, preparing to run or die, fighting off Creepy McCreeperson, I felt something. The leash. Kuma. In that moment, I had forgotten that I wasn't alone at all, not by a long shot. The sound I had heard was a warning, a very lethal one. It was the deepest, most menacing growl I have ever heard come out of anything. That beautiful beast stepped out from behind me, where he'd been observing the threat, like a giant dragon rising from the shadows. The man's creepy smile slipped right off his face, as did a few shades of color. Kuma placed his large body between mine and the approaching strangers and pressed back against me, urging me towards the jeep. He didn't have to tell me twice. I turned and started to make my way back to the car, still holding that leash for dear life. He walked backwards, pressed against me the whole time, watching my back until we made it back to where we had parked. I tried to look for the man, but he either ran back to wherever he came from or made it inside, taking a much longer route, well outside Kuma's reach. I told my husband what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure who would have done more damage to that unfortunate man if they had located him. Every day for the next 9 years, Kuma was my best friend and guardian. Rest in peace, baby boy. When I, 26 male, was 13, I was visiting my grandparents' farm during the summer in rural USA. To kill time, I would spend the afternoon fishing alone on a riverbank about 3 miles away and would ATV there. This location happened to also be near a seldom-used campsite. Where I fished, there is a long steep boat ramp and dock, I think 150 feet long, sloping down to the water, surrounded by steep eroded banks with tall grass and weeds, making anyone below the top of the boat ramp invisible to campers. While I was fishing, a car drove over the top of the boat ramp and parked below by me. A guy in his 60s got out and walked over to me. He asked me about what I was fishing for, what I was using as bait, and where I lived. I don't remember all of the conversation, but I started getting creeped out when he eventually offered bait he hadn't used in his car. I declined. After a bit, he said he was a part-time photographer for a fishing magazine and wanted to take my picture for it. Although I was creeped out, I obliged, just to see if he would leave soon. He snapped a couple of me with my pole and a fish I had caught. After what felt like too long, he started to leave, but then asked for an address to send the magazine with my photos in it. Really feeling weirded out, I gave a fake address with my house number and road name changed. Looking back, I think I may have been in considerable danger. We moved into a house in the country about 4 months ago. Since we previously lived in an apartment, that means we needed to buy a lawnmower. Instead of putting out $200+ on a lawnmower when we'd have to move in a few years, we decided to hire somebody to cut our grass. Initially, we went with the guy that my fiancé used to work with, but $65 every 2 weeks starts to add up, and I was looking for something cheaper. That brings me to Charles. Charles posted in my Facebook classified that he was looking for some lawns to cut this weekend, and he had a quote-unquote reputable company. So I sent him a message. Initially, Charles came off as nice. He asked for my address so he could stop by and give me an estimate. After stopping by my house, he sent me a message saying,
Damn, sweetheart, you got a big porch.
It made me kind of uncomfortable, but I figured I was overreacting and started planning when I could come out. I told him my off days, but he assured me I didn't have to be home. I told him to come Wednesday. Wednesday morning, he messaged me.
Are you home?
I said no. 3 hours later,
Are you home yet?
I told him no, I wouldn't be home till after 8. Charles then informed me his tire had a flat and he could come tomorrow. Thursday, first thing in the morning, he messaged me.
Will you be home today?
I told him no. He messages back a few hours later.
Hey, are you home?
I said, no, I told you I wouldn't be home all day. Are you still coming out? Then he told me his truck broke down. He was sending messages like,
Please don't be upset with me, sweetheart.
At this point, I was getting really creeped out. I told him, just come tomorrow. Friday. It's actually my off day, but I woke up and left the house for the day. He messages me.
Hey, I'm coming. You're off today, right?
I said yes, but I'm not home.
When will you be home?
I don't know. He messaged me later saying,
Sorry, babes. I was loading the equipment into my truck, and it fell and broke. Maybe I can come tomorrow.
At this point, I was really creeped out, and I told him never mind. I'm gonna find somebody else. Saturday, I get off work around 4 or 5, and I check my phone and find multiple messages from him saying that he had cut my grass, and I need to come home and give him the money. I told him no, I'll cash app it to you. He started getting really irate and saying that I need to give him the money now. I told him I would give him the money after I got home and thought the grass was cut. I was honestly really worried he would be waiting at my house, so I got a friend to drive home behind me. He wasn't there. I sent him the money and I thought that was the end of it. Fast forward to 2 months later, I'm on the phone with my fiancé as I drive to class. And he tells me that he has to get off the phone because there's somebody walking down our driveway. I asked him what he meant, and he said there was a man walking around our driveway and front yard. After I got to class, he texted me, telling me it was just a man who had come by to promote his lawn care business. I didn't think anything about it, as it had been 2 months, but later that night, I got home and saw a business card lying on my counter with the name of the man who had been messaging me earlier. I called my fiancé Mike at work and asked how the guy had been acting. He said Charles seemed genuinely surprised that a man had come out and asked if he lived alone. I asked Mike if the man had stopped at any other houses, and he replied, Now that I think about it, no. After he left our house, he just left. Mike said he had seemed really desperate to help around the house and offered to cut the lawn, fix our porch, remove any trash or scrap metal we had around the house, and then asked if we had pests such as bats in our attic or anything. That especially freaked me out, as we do have a bat problem, and I had previously posted about it on Facebook. Mike then said what was really weird, Charles was very freaked out about the dog. He heard Max barking from inside and started asking a lot of questions like, is he big? Does he stay inside or outside? Does he ever go outside or does he stay inside completely? How big is he? Is he nice? Mike chalked it up to him being scared of dogs. He gave him a brief tour of the outside of the house, and then Charles got in his truck and left. I then told Mike that this was the same guy who had been messaging me earlier in the year, and Mike began to freak out. He said that Charles had asked a lot of really specific questions about who all lived here, how long they lived here, and where they were at the time. He said he tried to brush them off, but Charles seemed really insistent to know if Mike was the only one in the house. Before he left, Mike specifically asked him if he had cut the lawn here before or something, and maybe was thinking of the last owners. But Charles told him,
"No, I just happened to be out this way and thought I'd promote my business in the neighborhood."
The worst part, I had taken my fiancé's car to work that day, which means my car was in the driveway when Charles stopped by. He thought I was home alone. I didn't contact the police because I thought I might be overreacting. This all happened 2 days ago, and I really hope that we never meet again. So, my boyfriend recently moved to the city and got this room in this student building. To explain, we have 3 different levels, and each level is the same. It has 4 individual doors with individual locks. Each door is a separate room you can rent, so you share a shower, toilet, kitchen, but overall, it's kind of like having your own place, more like an apartment than a house. He lives on the 3rd floor, and we recently bought a cabinet for his place. So as we were lifting the cabinet through the front door, a guy also comes into the building with us. We politely let him pass, because lifting the thing upstairs is going to take a lot of time. I smile at him and say hello, and then I see his face. Legit then, all my stranger danger alarms start going off. He had this weird smile, like a satisfied, smug smile. He towered me, and I saw his dirty mustache that barely even was a mustache. That kind of thing 14-year-olds grow. Nothing really is there yet, just here and there some hairs. Also, his hair looked greasy, and he just looked dirty. We noticed he went to the 2nd floor, so lucky for us. My boyfriend and I ignore it, but once we get upstairs, we both agree he creeped us out. But we try not to judge and just let it go. Like a week or so later, we have a dog over. We go and walk him in the evening. It was still light outside at this time. As we start to walk back to the building, we spot the creepy guy and have to pass him because of the way he was walking. It was like he was walking in slow motion, not a care in the world, with again, the satisfied smug smile on his face. But that's not what creeped us out. Looking at his face, we realized there was no way he was sober. He looked so out of this world, very noticeably on drugs. In that moment, the way he walked and the way he looked, I just got really wrong vibes from him. I did not want to be close to him at all, and my stranger danger alarms went off again. This happened near the city center. My boyfriend and I decided not to walk back with him to the building, so we took another route, just to avoid walking with him, and we take our time to make sure he's in his room before we enter the building. But this is the creepy part. I'll have to give you some background information. 3 weeks before our first encounter with this guy, someone randomly got murdered while he was jogging near the school campus. Stabbed, died instantly. The suspect had been seen at that time near the campus, and so a drawing of the suspect had been released. But they didn't have him and didn't really have anything to work with. Now, just today, my boyfriend and I got back from his work at like 4 in the afternoon when we noticed someone in a suit standing outside. Later that night, the guy who lives next door catches me as I just got back from the bathroom and asks me if we already have a key to the front door. I say yes, we do have one. Why? He said that the police had to break the door down, so he was in charge of getting everyone new keys. My boyfriend at this time joins us together with the person who lives at the other side of us. I ask what happened. Apparently, the guy who killed the person near campus lived on the 2nd floor, Legit, my hair starts standing up straight when I hear this. I asked if he'd seen how he looked. He told me he was tall, black hair with a weird mustache, and looked kind of dirty. It was the creepy dude. My boyfriend and I are still in utter shock that we lived so close to this murderer, someone who walked around near the city center and cooked his dinner in the shared kitchen while he took someone's life, someone I smiled to, said hello to, and tried to avoid. So, creepy murderer, living in the same building, let's not meet again. This creepy encounter was kind of prolonged and got especially creepy at the end. I was a fairly awkward and introverted teenage girl, so my high school guidance counselor encouraged me to take a theater elective in 10th grade to help me come out of my shell. The class was terrible and miserable, and I hated every second of it, but it did more than just take me out of my comfort zone. It introduced me to a really weird guy. I wouldn't say that I really thought that this guy was a creep from the beginning. He had a fairly obvious crush on me, but he wasn't too weird about it. He wrote me the occasional note and asked me to one school dance. I told him no, and he took the rejection fairly well. He still tried to talk to me all the time, but he eventually started dating someone else, and then left me alone. I assumed that the relationship lasted through 11th grade, as I only saw him occasionally, and he never tried to talk to me. I went to the 12th grade homecoming dance with a group of my girlfriends, and we actually spent a good portion of the night dancing and really enjoying ourselves. At one point, we sat down to rest and have a snack, and the guy from 11th grade theater class came over and sat at our table. He seemed upset and actually started crying, so I asked if he was okay. He told me that his girlfriend had just dumped him, and I responded that it was pretty shitty of her to do at a school dance. I guess he took this as me making a move on him, because he immediately grabbed my arm, yanked me from the table, and pulled me into a fairly secluded corner. He was immediately in my personal space, asking me if I would be his new date. I tried to push him away, but he had a pretty firm grip on me, and then he tried to go in for a kiss. I was in total shock as this happened and kind of froze. Luckily, one of my friends swooped in and told him that I was her date, so he should back off. He spent the rest of the evening dancing fairly close to us, but he luckily didn't say anything. Flash forward to the rest of 12th grade. I didn't have classes with him, but his locker was fairly close to mine, so I unfortunately saw him a lot. He stared at me a lot, but he didn't say much to me until right before graduation, where he asked to sign my yearbook. I was afraid that he would write something weird in it, so I told him no, but I did wish him good luck in life. He responded that I was what he would miss most about high school. I kind of forgot that he existed until about 3.5 years later. I was in college, and I got a message from someone asking me if I knew him and when we had last spoken. Apparently she was his girlfriend. I told her that we had gone to high school together and hadn't spoken since before we graduated. She asked why he talked about me all the time, and I told her that I had honestly no idea because we weren't even friends on social media. Then she asked me why she found my first and last name in his wallet. I was incredibly confused by this, and I asked her what she meant, and she told me that she was going through his wallet and had found my first and last name on a piece of paper just sitting in his wallet. She said he denied knowing who I was and said that I must have stuck my name in his wallet as a joke when we were hanging out, which obviously never happened. I think she was expecting me to confess that he was cheating with me or something, but all it did was freak me the fuck out. I found him on social media and blocked him, then blocked her too for good measure. Luckily, I haven't heard from him since, and this was about 11-ish years ago, but I have to wonder why he had my name in his wallet. As a side note, he was on the local news just a week or so later because his dad had met someone online and then locked her in the basement for a weekend. He was defending his dad and calling the woman a liar. I'm pretty sure that his dad wound up going to prison for kidnapping and criminal confinement, so the apple didn't fall too far from the crepe tree. This is a story my mom told me from when I was only 2 years old. My family has a small acreage in the Canadian prairies. It's not too far out from the city, but far enough that it was very rare to have unexpected visitors. At the time, we had some sheep and chickens, but it wasn't a huge farm. It was just my mom, dad, sister, and I. My sister was 5 years older than me, so only 7 at the time. We also had a sweet dog named Maggie. My parents have always said that she was the best farm dog we ever had. She was some sort of Bouvier cross, with shaggy black hair, and was very sweet with animals and kids. She also never barked or got upset without a very good reason, much unlike our last pup, who, bless her soul, would bark at the wind. My dad was out of town this particular night, probably visiting my grandpa in his town down south. My mom was alone with just us little guys, and Maggie was sleeping soundly on the porch. My mom woke up in the middle of the night to Maggie growling. My mom's a pretty light sleeper, so it doesn't take much to wake her up, but this was very unusual behavior for our pup. My mom thought it was probably an animal, so she took a peek outside. Sometimes coyotes or large bucks would upset Maggie, so that was the most likely explanation. However, this wasn't the case that night. Our farm is right adjacent to the highway, and there is a long, unlit lane that leads into our yard. It wasn't obvious at first, but my mom saw a dark vehicle slowly creeping down the lane. The car's headlights were shut off, and we didn't have a lot of light in the yard. My mom's stomach immediately sunk. Anyone with good intentions wouldn't shut off their headlights. She also had 2 little kids in the house that she had to protect. She watched them slowly creep into the yard. I don't know how many there were, but at least a couple of guys got out of the vehicle and headed towards the shop where my dad keeps his tools, tractor, etc. At the time, there was a big power panel on the side that controlled all the electricity to the yard lights and the house. They opened it up and started to go through it, evidently trying to figure out how to shut off the power. God knows what their intentions were. Luckily, my family has a hunting rifle, and my mom grew up on a farm, so she knows her way around a gun. Rifle in hand, she quietly propped open the door, just enough to stick the barrel out. She fired a few warning shots in the guys' direction. They freaked out and hopped back in their vehicle, reversing all the way down the lane so that she couldn't see their license plate. I honestly have no idea what these guys' plans were. Maybe just to rob us, but the idea of people pulling into the yard with no headlights and shutting off the power is unsettling. Either way, I'm extremely grateful for our sweet Maggie and badass mom for keeping us safe. It's been 21 years since that happened, but I sure hope we don't meet those guys again. Wow, do I have a crazy story for you guys? Sorry if it's a little long. This experience has caused me a lot of anxiety, and it actually feels therapeutic typing this out. During my freshman year of college in New Hampshire, a girl in my dorm hall accidentally caused a small dorm room fire by leaving popcorn in too long at like 3 a.m. We all had to evacuate, and the fire trucks came, and the RAs made a pretty big stink about it. The girl who lit the fire was the subject of many yik-yak jokes, and I felt bad for her because she really wasn't attractive. And plus, causing microwave fires seemed like a pretty innocent mistake for such harsh comments. A couple of days after the incident, I saw her in the resident hall and made casual small talk by asking her how things were poppin' and kind of just checking up on her because I felt bad. She laughed, and that was kind of it. A conversation of about 2 minutes. Fast forward a week later, and I hear a knock at my dorm door, and the same girl, who I'm now going to refer to as Popcorn, comes literally running into my room with no hesitation. I didn't even tell her my room number, and at the time, I just figured she saw me go in there once because she didn't even know my name at this point. It takes me a second to realize that she's in full-blown tears. There is now a stranger on my bed in tears, and I'm just like, So I counsel her like the bleeding heart I am, and I ask what's wrong. She tells me that the black dining hall cook SA'd her, and the college wouldn't fire him, and that she was suffering emotionally because of it. Being a victim of assault myself, I really sympathized with her situation and gave her my phone number in case she needed help walking to the dining hall with a safety net and whatnot. I don't take SA lightly. The night after our conversation in my room, I got a call from her to walk her to the dining hall because the cook that assaulted her was working that day. I walked her down to get food, and she just lit up like a glow stick, and a whole new person emerged. It didn't matter that her assaultant was in the room. She was talking my ear off about Pretty Little Liars, One Direction, etc. A lot of things I just don't really care about. But then again, she had no one to talk to, and the situation was complicated. I just listened and nodded my head. Over the course of about 2 weeks, give or take, I had walked her down to the dining hall about maybe 4 or 5 times. She may have been a victim of assault, but she was also a very annoying and unappealing person. For God's sake, she actually talked about herself in the third person. Her story about the assaults became inconsistent, and there was always new major developments about what happened, and the story was changed to something much more drastic and severe. It went from assault to full-on gang rape as her story developed. That made me immediately uncomfortable and unsettled. I didn't want to walk her down or interact with her anymore. The week of Thanksgiving, I went back home to visit my family while Popcorn stayed on campus. During that week, I had 60 missed phone calls from Popcorn. One day, I even had 20 plus calls in the span of a couple hours. No normal person does that. Red flags definitely were raising if they hadn't been already. When I got back to campus, there was a knock on my door, and sure enough, it was Popcorn crying again. She tells me that because I wasn't on campus to protect her, she was R-worded by a Muslim guy while walking to Panera Bread, and the Filipino RA groped and slapped her boobs. If red flags were being raised, then this was full-on sirens. I'm no R-word apologist by any means, but the rape-to-ratio rate was exponentially high, especially since these 3 assaults happened within a month's time frame, all by people of color, seemingly at random. She was making these stories up to elicit some sick form of sympathy, and as an actual victim of assault, I was beyond offended. I told her I had to leave for class, and ran the fuck off to my friend to ask for advice. It got really crazy, really fast. I warned the RA officers about her, and they told me they would talk to her. During class, I was up to 100 plus missed calls, and a series of individual messages that just said, "Hi." I was done with this shit. I wanted nothing to do with her. I blocked her number and went back to my dorm. That week after classes, I just went straight to my dorm. I didn't want to see her. One day, I had to go to the bathroom, so I walked into the stall to do my business. I'm just casually in there peeing, with my pants around my ankles, when Popcorn literally fucking crawls on the bathroom floor and dips her head underneath the stall door and says, "Ha! I knew you would eventually come out." I'm freaked the fuck out, and in near tears. I tell her I'm wicked busy, I don't have time for her, and that I was upset that she invaded my privacy. It took a lot of courage to do, because I struggle deeply with confrontation. She tells me all about how she is thinking of dying, because her mom died when she was young. Some manipulative shit that I was just not in the mood for. I leave her in the bathroom and go to my room and lock the door. I watched some YouTube, and I took a nap when I was rudely awakened by not knocking, but pounding on my door. I did not answer. The pounding just continued and got louder. "Open this door, or I will kill you." And she just waited and waited outside my dorm, singing songs into the other door cracks for an hour. I was so scared, I just cried and called my dad to pick me up from school. I didn't have many friends that lived on campus since it was a small college and a lot of people commuted, and this whole situation just made me feel so isolated. My mental health was deteriorating rapidly. The RAs had been informed of the threats made at my door by other students observing what happened, and she was giving a warning, but that was all. One night, I had my boyfriend, who lived 3 hours away at the time, come to spend the night at the college. We had been watching a movie, and now we were napping on my bed when we hear the door open. Like an idiot, I had completely spaced and forgot to lock the door. Popcorn comes running in and jumped on top of us and says in a baby voice, "Popcorn wants cuddles." I was beyond creeped out and was basically screaming, "What the fuck?" My boyfriend, being the no-nonsense confrontational person he is, told her to get the absolute fuck out of my room. She told him that she would, and I quote, "just go and die like her mother did when she was 3 and inject cancer into herself." My boyfriend smiled and said, "Good," and then pushed her out of the room and slammed the door, giving 0 fucks. I swear he almost slammed her fingers shut. I love him. We reported her to the campus police in the morning, and still nothing major came of it. That was until there was another popcorn fire in her dorm, not too far after, and she got kicked out. I wish that's where the story ends with her, but unfortunately, no. After she left the dorms, my resident life became a lot easier. I made a lot of new normal friends, and I was feeling a lot less anxious. One day, a girl in one of my classes invited me to go to the mall with her to go get her nails done. Now, this nail salon had clear glass, so you could see the rest of the outside mall when you were getting your nails done. I'm all relaxed when all of a sudden, I see Popcorn's fucking face pressed up against the glass of this nail salon, and she is with a morbidly obese neckbeard. I'm getting my nails done, and she is literally staring at me through the window for a good 10 minutes with this man. To say that I was unnerved was an understatement. I told my friend what was going on, and we booked it out of there, and they tried hard to follow. In retrospect, that's when I should have called the real police. After the mall, I had a bunch of random friend requests from profiles with a small Yorkie dog as the profile pic, and several message requests. I opened them, and they were from Popcorn asking me to be her bridesmaids at a Pizza Hut wedding that her and her fiancé were having in 2 years. You can't even make this shit up. There was another message about how she was so upset that I didn't acknowledge her at the mall, and she had waited so long to introduce me to her doting fiancé that she was so upset with me that she wanted to wring my neck. Of course, I blocked all those profiles, and things were pretty silent. I've been living with my boyfriend and going to school in Rhode Island for 2 years currently. I'm loving school, and I have an excellent group of friends. About 5 months ago, I had gone home from work and had 3 missed calls from a random New Hampshire number. Thinking it was one of my family members, I called back, and nope, it was Popcorn on the other end. I imminently hung up. There was also a voicemail left that was just a person breathing into the phone and telling me that I was expected at a wedding. I cried, and I called the police urgently about the number. I didn't know what happened, or if anything did come of it, but I haven't been bothered since then. I'm a very kind person, and people often take advantage of my openness. It really is a fatal flaw that I'm working really hard on. It is unfortunate that there are so many unhinged and lonely people, but we really shouldn't make it our burden to help them. Sometimes being nice can actually cause a lot of mental strain. To Popcorn, let's not meet again. I'm European, and when I was 16, I attended a Catholic high school in the States. It was all new to me, of course. There were so many things I had only seen in movies that amused me, some that weirded me out, some that annoyed me. I loved it though, and I always had a great spirit of adaptation, so within the first month I was there, I already had a great group of friends. It felt precisely like being in a movie sometimes, having lunch with the cool kids at the most popular table, lockers, football games, all new and exciting to me. Another new thing for me was having to change classes every hour. In the country where I'm from, you sit 5 hours in the same desk with the same people sitting in the same seats, while the professors alternate every hour. In fact, one of my favorite classes was English because it was the one my friends and peers attended the most. I was sitting next to this guy who, for privacy, I'll call Mark, who was very nice and friendly despite being a bit of an introvert. Everyone knew him anyway. The school was small, and among peers, we really hung out 100% despite the differences, and he was no exception, despite not being the most charismatic of the school. It amazed me that whenever I talked to him, he never looked me in the eye. He would always look around, or at the ground, often moving his eyes quickly. This fascinated me, and of course didn't disturb me at all. I found it a way to combat shyness. No red flags. In short, a little month goes by since my arrival, and things were going very well. One morning, I sat next to Mark. He was my desk mate, and we talked as usual. I asked him if he could let me copy the last part of my homework that I had not been able to do during study hall, and he accepted very kindly. We continued to chat and say goodbye. The day goes on smoothly, and the next day, I noticed that Mark didn't come to school. A few days go by, and a rumor begins to circulate the hallways that poor Mark, on his way home, had found his mother dead. But that's terrible, I thought. Such a good kid doesn't deserve such a big trauma. No one does. 2 weeks pass. The rumors, of course, continue to circulate, and we hear the most absurd theories. The mother was with her head in the oven. She committed suicide. She was attacked, robbed, strangled. In short, a great series of things that do not give peace to the poor lady who left us. I was very annoyed by this attitude, where this thing was treated like any other gossip. So Mark went back to school one day. He was very sad. The gossip ceased. Although in a low voice, you could still hear commentaries. But we, his friends, in the senior year, squeezed into his grief without crossing the line. I'm here for anything. I'm so sorry. My condolences. Come on, let's go out for lunch afterwards. And the usual things you would say to a grieving friend. I've never been good at this stuff, so in English class, I put my arm around him and said a very simple, "Yo, I heard. I'm sorry." And he, for the first time, looked at me straight in the eye and thanked me. He was a different person. There was a darkness in his eyes that gave me goosebumps. He was sad, deeply. But it wasn't just sadness, it was almost despair. I thought, he's grieving. If this were to happen to me, I don't think I could ever recover. So I understood and respectively left him to grieve. The next day, Mark is absent again. I keep thinking, that's normal. I wouldn't be able to make it to school one day. I get it. And meanwhile, completely unrelated, a man starts hanging around the cafeteria during lunchtime. I ask who he is, and they tell me Miss Lefebvre's husband, fictional name, not just for privacy, but I can't remember what the fuck the counselor's name was. The rumors around the school, meanwhile, continue to swirl, and I get really angry because this time, they're really exaggerated. You have to show respect, and stop even thinking such things, I told my friends. Another week goes by, and the atmosphere at the school has literally turned to ice. From the speakers, the principal's voice calls all the seniors to the gym for a communication. We go there, and next to Mr. Baghdad, again, same name problem, is Miss L's husband. This time, however, I hear his voice for the first time, and he tells us what we already knew. Mark killed his mother by choking her. Although the idea had already formed in my mind, I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I didn't get the creeps simply because of the fact that an acquaintance of mine had the courage to kill his mother. I come from a fairly violent country. I have acquaintances in jail and others who, although free, have done some bad things, but never something like this. But, because of the dynamics of things, Mr. L, now I'm just assuming here that his wife took his last name, began to tell us, since he wasn't simply just a guest there, he was a town detective, and was literally conducting investigations at the school, that things happened one morning. Mark asked his mother for the car keys to get to school, which she needed though, and after she refused, he jumped on her and strangled her. Then he came to school and fucking sat next to me, gave me English homework, as if that was the main problem of the day, came home and called the police. The school also provided a psychologist, but no one consulted him. But in retrospect, I think a chat with him wouldn't have hurt. I was literally in an episode of 13 Reasons Why, 5 years before it aired. In my country, dealing and fighting happens quite often, so I thought I had seen enough. Obviously, I was wrong, and every now and then, I still think about Mark's deeply empty eyes staring back at me. Keep in mind that I'm European. I guess for some unfortunate of you, this is nothing new, or you've had far worse happen to you in high school, but this all happened within a month of moving into a world totally new to me. So yes, this is the creepiest encounter of my life. When I was in middle school, I took the city bus to school because my parents couldn't drive me and no school buses routed to my neighborhood. I didn't live in a particularly good place, but I never felt unsafe, probably because I was a kid and thought myself invincible. That morning, I got onto the bus to go to school, 6th grade at that time, so I was about 12. But let me tell you, I have always looked much younger than my age. It was decently crowded, so I go to my usual spot in the back. A few stops go by, and then a man gets on and sits right next to me. It's been about 10 years now, but I still remember how he looked. Tall, thin, Hispanic, with long straight black hair. There was maybe 1 or 2 seats open, so it wasn't weird that he was next to me at first. I just figured he sat in the first seat he saw open. Then he started to talk to me. I can't remember what he said at first, but being early in the morning and already peeved that I had to share my space with him, I just made vague, disinterested noises at him. Then he asked where I was going. That's when my spidey senses started to tingle, because obviously it's early in the morning and I'm a child, so I'm going to school. So I said school in an duh way. I realize now he was probably looking for me to tell him which school. A few stops went by and the bus opened up more, so I quickly went and found another empty seat. Not 5 minutes later, he follows and still tries to get me to talk to him. He asks my name. I look to the front of the bus and see some 8th graders that I know from my school and from riding this bus. My animal brain screams at me to find safety in the pack. I move up to the front of the bus and plant myself in the middle of them and basically press myself into them and give them help me eyes. The guy moves again and sits directly in front of me. He asks my name again, and one of the boys I'm sitting with, G, quickly calls me by a fake name and turns his body so he's kind of shielding me and carries on conversation with me until we get to our school. The group of 8th graders basically formed a circle around me, and we huddled off the bus, and I turned to make sure the creep didn't follow us off the bus. Thankfully, he didn't follow, but for the next few weeks, I caught either the earlier or later bus in case he was on it again. And since the bus stop was right in front of my school, I was afraid he knew where I went and would show up, but I never saw him again. So let's not meet, bus creep. I'm so thankful those kids were there to help me. I don't know if that guy might have thought I was younger than I looked, so possibly elementary school age, and thought I was young and stupid enough to trust him with more personal information. Last November, my brother was visiting us from Dundee with his 3-year-old son. Since my brother had moved from Glasgow, we didn't get to see him or his family too often, so we cherished it anytime we got to see them. His wife, unfortunately, could not drive down due to work, and only a day into his visit, he was called back himself for an emergency. His nephew wanted to stay, as we had bought him tickets to the football game the day after, so I agreed to take him back to his dad in Dundee after the game. The only train I could get was a fairly late one, and it was therefore the last one of the day, so I took my nephew to the football game and headed straight to the station afterwards. The train was fairly busy, but I had booked us 2 seats. Just as we were about to board the train, the man standing next to me made an odd comment.
Like sardines, aren't they? I hate sardines,
he said. I found this fairly odd, and I just laughed it off awkwardly. I've never been good at making conversations with strangers, and always feel uneasy when one approaches me. As we made our way to our seats, I noticed an old couple sitting in them. I told them it was our seats, but they were fairly rude and told me that old people shouldn't be made to stand for a journey. I always hate confrontation, especially in public, so I just left. There were no 2 seats together anywhere on the train, so me and my nephew were forced to stand for about an hour until many people on the train finally got off when it stopped in Perth. Me and my nephew sat down, and I mistakenly fell asleep as I was so tired after a fairly long day and standing for an hour on the train. As my nephew was only 3, he obviously fell asleep as well. I awoke just as the last passengers were getting off at Dundee. I quickly jumped up and tried to get my nephew off the train as quickly as possible, but he was too slow and I had to stay on the train with him, meaning we missed the stop. As the train was delayed slightly, it was now going straight to Aberdeen, which was about another hour or so away. I sat down and tried to phone anyone I knew, but I didn't have signal. I began to panic, as I knew that there would be no return trains from Aberdeen at this time of night, likely meaning I would have to stay the night there in a hotel. I tried to compose myself and looked about the train to see if there was anyone who could maybe help me. My carriage had more or less cleared out by this point, and there was only 3 other people left. An older woman sleeping a few rows in front of me, a young man reading a book at the opposite side, and a 3rd man behind me. I told my nephew to go back to sleep and started trying to plan what I would do when we got to Aberdeen. As my phone had no signal, this was obviously fairly difficult, and I thought I should ask the man behind me for any help. I looked in the window's reflection at him and noticed it was the same man who made the sardine comment earlier. He was a middle-aged man, fairly average build and height, and there was nothing to suggest he was in any way dangerous, except one thing. He was staring right at me. I looked away for a minute, thinking maybe he was just looking about the train as I did only a moment ago, but when I looked again, he was still staring. His stare didn't seem to break until he got up to presumably go to the toilet. I debated switching to another carriage, but before I could gather my stuff and wake my nephew, he returned. Only this time, he sat in a different seat, facing me directly. A few uneasy minutes passed before he made his first comment.
Someone's sleepy,
he said, nodding to my nephew. I laughed awkwardly and put my earphones in to avoid talking to him, even though my phone had just died.
Must be some set of earphones if they can listen to music when your phone's dead,
he said. My heart dropped.
I'm only kidding you on,
he said, but I now had no excuse to avoid conversation with him.
So, are you going home or visiting someone?
He asked. I made the mistake of telling him what had happened and that I had missed my stop.
That's quite the situation. You won't get a train back at this time.
I nodded and said I'll just find a hotel for the night. He then approached my seat and sat across from me.
Hotels will be all booked out, and even if they aren't, they'll charge you a fortune. I've got a place not far from the station. You can stay there for the night and get a train in the morning. I'll stay out of the way of you and your son. Don't worry.
I explained to the man that it was not my son, and that I was happy to cough up the money for a hotel, and tried to stay polite by saying I didn't want to be a nuisance for him, even though I really just wanted to tell him to fuck off.
Oh, believe me, you won't be any nuisance to me,
he said in an overly friendly tone. I was now feeling extremely unnerved, but still tried my best to talk myself out of the situation. This conversation carried on for another 10 minutes or so, and he was increasingly insistent that I stayed with him. I didn't have any idea what to do, I felt completely helpless. I told him I needed the toilet in an effort to get away from the carriage. This is when he grabbed my wrist below the table.
"You're not going anywhere,"
he said in a hushed tone.
"You're staying with me. I'll keep you safe,"
he said in an extremely chilling voice. I couldn't even bring myself to scream out in the situation. The only other passengers on the carriage were at the opposite end, and I was terrified that if I screamed, the man would hurt me or my nephew. He wouldn't let go of my wrist and repeatedly began saying,
"Just act natural."
The remaining part of the journey seemed to last a lifetime, and I knew, even then, that there was no light at the end of this tunnel, as the man would not let me go. The train finally reached Aberdeen, and the man told me to wake my nephew, not alarm him, and to tell him that we were staying at this nice man's house for the evening. He held my hand as we got off the train, and my worst feelings were coming true, as I knew what would happen when this man got us back to his house. All of a sudden, I was knocked to the floor in a heap of bodies. The police had tackled the man and were arresting him. As I got to my feet, I grabbed my nephew's hand and ran only a couple of yards before completely breaking down. The police comforted me and told me that the young man who was reading his book at the other side of the carriage had noticed what was going on and sent a text to the British Transport Police, whose number is all over the walls of the train on posters. It took me a couple of minutes to process everything, but I managed to gain enough composure to thank the police and express my gratitude towards the man who had sent the text. I only managed to say a few words to him, but I will be forever grateful to him, as he saved me from what would have been a night of terror, and very possibly saved me and my nephew's life. The police very kindly took me and my nephew back to Dundee, where my brother and his wife were extremely relieved to see us. It is now some time since the incident, but it has had a lasting effect on me, and I always make sure that when I'm traveling late at night that I'm accompanied by someone, and never run the risk of missing my stop ever again. This story takes place in the summer of 2017. My name is John. I live in a rural part of Alabama, but I choose to work in the city. The drive is about 45 minutes or so, depending on traffic. However, by the time I pick my son up from the sitter, get dinner, and get home, I've been in the car about 1.5 hours. My house is surrounded by trees, and the neighbors are few and far between. It can be pretty lonely living here, but I enjoy the privacy. One evening, I pulled in my driveway and noticed something odd. The doors on my storage shed were wide open. I told my son to sit in the car as I got out to investigate. I didn't see anything missing and closed the doors back. I know the wind had not blown them open because it has 2 latches you have to open in order to get it open. The next day, I look around, and much to my dismay, 2 weed eaters, along with a few other garden tools, were missing. I know I should have contacted the police, but I knew there wasn't much that they could do at that point. Throughout the week, I had some time off and decided to tackle some yard work that I needed to get done, which included cutting down a medium-sized tree that had grown next to my house. Once I cut it down, it took everything I had to move it to the edge of my property, just inside the woods. I planned on cutting it up another day. Fast forward to the next Friday night. I left work at 7 p.m., picked up my son, and we arrived home at 8:30 p.m. As I pulled in the driveway, my son and I noticed something laying across the driveway. It looked as if a tree branch had fallen across my driveway. As I drove up to it, I thought to myself, there are no trees over my driveway. Once I looked towards the base of the tree, my heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. It was the tree I had cut down. I had put it clear on the other side of my property until I could cut it up. I recognized the marking from my chainsaw. I didn't know what to do. My son and I sat there in silence for at least 5 minutes. I rolled the driver and passenger window down just an inch and listened to hear if anyone was out there. I heard nothing. I then realized in order for me to get to my house, I would have to move the tree. I was going to get out and move it just enough so we could get past, and I would lock the doors. If anything happens, he could use my phone to call the neighbor who lived the closest. I darted out of my car and moved the tree slightly and raced back to the car. I was terrified. Luckily, my son was on the ready to unlock the doors for me to get back in. I drove up towards my house, and we got in safely. I didn't sleep well that night. The next day, I woke up to find the tree was moved again, this time a few feet behind my car. To this day, I'm still baffled at who could have done this or what their intentions were. Next time, I will be smarter and call the police. I do have another question that I can't answer. How did someone know where I put the tree after I cut it down? Whoever had done this had to have been watching me. That thought alone is enough to keep me up some nights. Thanks, John. From 2006 to 2011, I worked in the electronics department at the local Walmart in the small city I lived in. Through those 5 years I'd worked there, I had plenty of creepy encounters with strange customers, especially considering the state hospital was directly across the road. This story isn't just a regular old creepy encounter, but something that would lead me to being stalked for nearly a year. It all started in 2010, on a night I was working second shift. I was doing my end-of-shift ritual when a woman in her late 40s interrupted me. She was with a little girl, no more than 3 or 4. "Excuse me, I need help with my cell phone," she spoke softly. She proceeded to tell me her problem. "I need to turn my phone into a straight talk phone. The girl earlier said you could do it." Of fucking course she did, I thought to myself. But my lips said, "Sure, let's see what I can do." She handed me a 6-year-old phone from Verizon, and I knew as soon as I saw it, I wouldn't be able to do what she wanted. I explained she would have to buy a new phone from Straight Talk and transfer her old number. Basic shit, really. Now, I always took my job seriously and held myself to the highest standard of customer service. I would often receive letters to the store from customers complimenting me. So, I assure you, I did nothing to actually piss off this lady. But sure as shit, she was pissed. Why the hell would I buy a new phone? I already have one. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. Her claims of me upselling her and being a corporate goon. I finally managed to defuse the situation, and as she left the department, she gives me the classic, "You'll never get a job in this town again." As I'm getting ready to leave my shift, my manager stops me and tells me I got a complaint at customer service from a lady claiming I swore at her granddaughter. Apparently, I told her to fuck off. I explained what happened, and he just laughed it off. My managers knew it was very unlike me to say anything like that to a customer. I wish the story ended there, but then I wouldn't be writing this. For the next several weeks, I would get complaints about things I've never done, sometimes even on my days off. I would come into questions from management nearly every day. It was complaints, ranging from me being rude to a customer, all the way to me doing drugs in the parking lot on break. All these complaints were coming from 2 women. As it turned out, it was cell phone lady and her adult daughter. It turns out that they had even been scoping out my work schedule and started coming in nearly every day. They would walk through electronics to make sure they saw me, and later that night, I would have a complaint. This happened for months. It happened so much, management deemed her Corzor's favorite customer. To be honest, I didn't care much. I even thought it was pretty funny. I never got in trouble, and everyone knew these ladies and just blew it off. I started caring when she took it to a new level. She started to follow me around. I would see her when I was around town. She made it clear she knew where I lived and would regularly walk by my house. I would see her standing out front, just looking at my place. I began getting complaints to the city about my property. grass too tall, the old shed in my yard, my fire pit, basically everything. She even found out my girlfriend's name and began complaining at her job. I knew it was her. She would make it so clear that she was following me. Sometimes she would stop in and ask me questions at work and act like the nicest customer. A few times, she asked me things like, "How's your girlfriend?" Or my favorite, "How can you afford that big house on your little Walmart wage?" For about 7 months, she stalked and slandered me. I started telling her I knew what she was doing and to stop, but she played it off. I couldn't report her. She never once threatened me. She was just making my life hard. By this time, everyone in my life knew about this nut job. One night, I'm grabbing dinner with my friends from work, and we're joking about it, when someone says, "What if you just counter-stalk her?" At first, I thought it was a terrible idea, but they convinced me it would work, and they would all help me. So, we hatched a plan, like something you'd read on r/pro revenge. It went as follows. Find her job, find her name and address, make complaints in the same manner as her, find out all the rumors she's told about me, make it clear that we know, show her that we have numbers. I found out her information easily enough. Turns out she didn't live anywhere near me. I was even friends with a few of her coworkers. They would keep me informed on crazy shit she said about me, and even told her to stop. We began doing exactly what she was doing to me. We did this for about 4 months. The more we dug into her life, the more I found out about how obsessed she was over getting me in trouble. She had claimed that I assaulted her. She urged others to report me and follow me. She told the police I was a potential drug dealer. Eventually, we won, though. She started putting together that there were 6 of us digging into her life and asking questions about her. My last month at work, I didn't get a single complaint. In fact, I never even saw her anymore. The day after I quit, though, I heard she was in the store complaining about a new person after asking one of the managers why I quit. I'll honestly never understand why she was so hell-bent on destroying me. I just told her to buy a $20 prepaid phone. This story happened to me a few months ago. In this situation, you probably didn't want to meet both parties, me and the guys that approached me. It was a Friday night. As usual, I was hanging out with my friends till late at night, and I had to walk home. They lived on the other side of our city. It's a 1-hour walk through the city, my university campus, and the garden of our city's castle. My city isn't notoriously criminal or anything, but you don't want to be at certain places at certain times. My route is pretty harmless, just neighborhoods and the campus. I should mention that I'm a martial artist. I train with several different types of swords, but also with some traditional blunt weapons, unarmed and with a dagger. One of my friends is also my apprentice. We train each Friday before we start chilling with the others. That's why I always have a dagger with me on Fridays. The dagger is a Japanese tanto and is also shiko mizue, which means that it looks like a 40-centimeter straight black stick. Since I've had people try to rob me 2 or 3 times in the past years, I hold the sheathed tanto in my hand when I walk home. It looks completely harmless, and I can even walk past police. Carrying bladed weapons openly is illegal in my country. Now to the situation that happened. I was walking through my campus as usual, and everything seemed normal. Some drunken students walking to their dorms, just like every Friday. But then, I walked past the building of my faculty. I don't want to go into detail of what I study, but my faculty is for chemical and biological science. The entrance of the building is also the part where the inorganic chemistry has its labs. Those labs were getting an upgrade, so there was construction at the side of the building for the workers. I glanced at the building with the construction and saw 2 people hushing away out of my eyesight. It was in the middle of the night. They weren't workers. I stopped and stared into their direction. They thought I walked away and came out, but I took this opportunity to take pics of them. They ran away, or at least, that's what I thought. Thinking my work of scaring them away was done, I continued walking. Suddenly, I heard steps behind me and two people talking to each other. They were maybe 3 meters away from me, and I hear that they're shit-talking me, making plans to attack me, and making jokes about the dildo I'm carrying. I'm a bit intimidated by their threats, but the homophobic jokes made me angry. I turned around and stopped walking. They also stopped. At first they looked at me as if I were an easy victim because they're a little bit taller than me and they're two people. But their confidence shattered when I pulled the blade out of the sheath and said loud and angry, "This is not a dildo," walking directly to them and having the tip of the blade at one of their chests. Those guys were frozen because they didn't expect this. I looked harmless with my polo shirt and my campus backpack, but I'm not. Of course, I wouldn't hurt them. I then just lied and said that I'm a person working at the institute and that they're no longer allowed to enter the university property and that I will call campus security. They sprinted away and I never saw them again. I'm sorry if my English isn't the best. It's not my first language, but I hope the post is nevertheless understandable that you enjoy the story. My friends and I laugh about this event now, but at the moment, I was full of adrenaline because they could have been armed just as well, and they planned on beating me up. I went to the grocery store early one morning. When I was checking out, there was an elderly gentleman in front of me. He was wearing a veteran's hat. He started making casual conversation with me about prices and how when he was young like me, the prices were super low. He was much older, so people around him, the cashier and some other gentlemen, helped him bag his groceries. He didn't have much, but it was hard for him to keep his balance. He almost fell at one point, held onto my arm, and apologized to me for doing so. I told him that it was okay and to have a great day. I also didn't have many things, so I began to walk out of the store and eventually caught up to him as he could not walk very fast. I asked him if he wanted me to walk him to his car, and he told me that he had rode his bike because he was forced to turn in his driver's license due to his age. I was impressed that he had rode his bike and asked him where he lived. He told me he lived about 15 minutes bike distance. I asked him if he wanted a ride. He was elderly and didn't seem like a threat. He accepted, so I popped my trunk open so that he could put his bike in. We were struggling when another man who was about to walk into the store saw and helped us. He thanked the elderly man for his service and proceeded to go inside. On the way, he asked if we could stop by Carl's Jr. to get a new combo his wife saw on TV and had asked him to bring her back one. He called his wife and asked her what the name of the combo was. Once we got to the drive-thru, he ordered and I offered to pay. He thanked me again. On the way to his house, he asked me what I do for a living. I told him I'm a paralegal, and he asked for my number because he was trying to sue the state of California and a detective who is now retired. I gave him my number and then asked him about his potential case. He then proceeded to tell me that he had been in jail in the 70s for a false R-word allegation and that the detective working on the case really had it out for him. I was shocked, but working in the legal field, it is not uncommon for me to see these types of situations. When we got to his house, his wife was waiting outside. She was also elderly. She thanked me for giving her husband a ride and seemed excited to have someone there. I had gotten out of the car to get his bike out of my trunk, so she asked me if she could show me their front yard, leading all the way up to their backyard. She said her and her husband worked on their home for many years. She seemed very proud of her home. I told them that I had to leave, but that it was nice to meet them. She insisted. I let them show me around, and when we got to the backyard, they opened the back sliding door and asked if I wanted to come in for some orange juice. I kindly declined. I suddenly got a very weird feeling, but I brushed it off. They told me I could come in and set my purse down if I wanted. My purse is a crossbody bag, so I hadn't even realized I still had it on. Anyways, they insist for me to come in. Mind you, they're super elderly, so I did. They began to show me their wedding photos on the walls. As we're walking through the home, the elderly man shows me all the doors, and the doors have all these crazy types of contraptions, and he says,
Look, so nobody can break out.
Mind you, he said break out, not break in. At this point, my gut was screaming at me to get out. He then said,
Come right this way. I want to show you how we converted this room.
My fight or flight response kicked in, and I don't know how I figured it out, but I was able to undo the contraptions from the front door and broke out of there. I ran to my car that was sitting in the driveway, and I drove away as fast as I could. I went the opposite direction from where my house was, but all I cared about was getting as far away as possible, fast. When I got home, I was shaken. I got several phone calls from him and voicemails asking why I had left so sudden and if I was okay. I blocked his number and called my cousin to tell her what had happened. Was I almost kidnapped? They were extremely old, but maybe someone else was in the house. Maybe someone much younger and stronger. Something just didn't feel right. Edit. They also told me they didn't have any children. When I did some research online, I found that they do have a daughter and a granddaughter who happens to be a local news reporter here in town. The fact that they lied about that only adds to my suspicions. Last year, I, 18 female, was living in a very rural town in the middle of the mountains. Most small western towns only have one road that goes into the big city. Our road in particular was about 50 miles of empty highway, surrounded by only cliffs, fields, and occasionally a farm. At the very entrance to this road, once you enter the city, is a huge truck stop gas station that is always packed. My mom and I were going back home after a midnight showing of whatever movie we had decided to see. And, as per usual, we stopped to fill up on gas and get a drink for the long drive. As we were leaving, I vaguely noticed a dingy older Jeep pull out the same time we did. But of course, I didn't take much notice of it. It wasn't weird that someone would be leaving the same time as us. As we started down the pitch-black road, the Jeep kept a steady pace behind us. Again, not weird, until it came flying up past us before disappearing behind a hill. My mom and I just scoffed. We were going 60, but when people knew the roads well, they often drove them at close to 100, even at night. Eventually, we came up to the Jeep from before. It was pulled over, but the back half of the vehicle was in the road, and what was clearly a man's arm was waving out the window, gesturing for us to pull over. Of course, we pass it. The man flies past us once more and pulls over again. He does this once more, and my mom and I begin to get very nervous. After passing him for the third time, he flies up and begins tailgating us. He's driving so close that we can't see his headlights in the rearview mirror, and he's honking his horn every so often, waving his arm for us to pull over. He carries on with this for 30 minutes. Mom and I are terrified. She's white-knuckling the wheel. I'm holding a pocket knife to make myself feel better. I swore at my own mom for the first time that night, begging her, "Don't you fucking dare pull over." If you've ever seen the movie Rest Stop, that is all that was going through my mind. The road is a dead zone for service, so we couldn't call the police or anyone. The picture of us dead, or worse, on the side of the empty road was the only thing I could think about. But as soon as it had started, it ended. The man slammed on his brakes, turned around, and went back. The ride home was silent, and I ended up sleeping in my mom's room out of fear. The next morning, we had a discussion and came to the conclusion he had seen 2 lone women traveling at night and thought we'd be easy pickings, which he would have been right. Some people suggest that he had seen us drop money or a receipt at the gas station and wanted to be a good Samaritan. I think that's ridiculous. Nobody following 2 women home in such an aggressive manner has good intentions. We moved out of town a few months later for unrelated reasons, but just before we did, the same car was reported for following a group of 4 men on their way to work, so maybe he just likes to scare people. Either way, that night was easily one of the scariest of my life. I was living in Abu Dhabi when this happened, and I was 17 years old at the time. I've had a number of experiences from taxi drivers out there that could fit on this sub, but this one was by far the worst and creepiest, and I'd like to share it with you all. It was Boxing Day 2012, and I was going to my friend's house for his Boxing Day party. He lived in a compound that was a bit of a drive off the island itself, and although not rural suburbs by most standards, this area could be classed as such. These residential suburbs were also still mostly in development. Every block had a new building site, plenty of empty shells of houses, no security cameras at the time, etc. There were no pavements either, just rubble and sand patches, split by tarmac roads. Now, taxis in the UAE are crazy common. You just put your hand out and one pulls up. And back then, there was less security. There were no cameras or mics in the car, just the meter. I hailed a cab and sat in the front as a result of a past experience I had, and we set on our way. Things start normally. We talked as I normally would, getting into a cab. How long have you lived here? Do you enjoy this place? Etc. Eventually, we're on the highway, and after we cross the water to the mainland, he pulls over on the hard shoulder and without saying a word to me, pulls out his phone and calls someone. He's speaking his native tongue, and he's of South Asian descent, so I have no clue what he's saying. But I ask him politely to continue driving as the meter is still on. He nods, hangs up, and gets going again. This happens again a second time without word or warning, and now I'm suspicious. This time, I ask him again to keep going, but he ignores me and keeps talking on the phone. We're on the highway, so I can't get out for fear of going splat, not being able to hail a cab, or being jacked for jaywalking. After a few minutes, he gets going again, and we pull off the highway, still heading the direction I needed to be. We reach the first roundabout where we need to make a right turn, but he goes straight over. Everyone knows where this compound is. It's the biggest one in the city, and as a cab driver, there's no chance he doesn't know how to get there. So now I'm even more suspicious, and I kind of have a feeling of trepidation, like I know this vibe and what might be happening. I ask him to turn around at the next roundabout, but he ignores me. Now I'm getting agitated and angry, and I ask him to just stop the car and I'll get out and walk. Nope. He literally just ignored me and kept focusing on the road. At this point, I'm shouting at him, numerous expletives, etc., and it's clear that he's got something else planned. Eventually, he pulls off the main road into a dirt track that led a couple of 100 yards into a massive building site, and he keeps driving down it. He then turns to me and tells me to get into the back seat, and repeats this in an increasingly forceful manner, to the point where we're shouting at each other. At the end of the dirt track is an old little minibus, with roughly 5 dudes stood next to it. I don't notice this immediately. All I care about is that the car has stopped, and I'm in the front, so I can get out. I'm not locked in. Inexplicably, I threw some money at him and jumped out of the car with my bag and started walking away, jogging back down the track. I can only imagine that the earlier phone calls he made were to these minibus men. And when I started getting away, they jump in the minibus and drive down to catch me, as the taxi turns around and does the same. They all pull up in front of me like police do in the movies when they stop a bank robber and jump out. The taxi driver runs right up to me, grabs me, and screams point blank at my face to get in the bus. I can still smell and feel the damp heat from his breath as it touched my face, and the little bits of his spit hitting my cheeks. This honestly just enraged me, so I grabbed him by the throat and pushed him against his car. I screamed something back at him, I can't remember what, and let go. They all get their phones out and start calling and messaging and moving towards me, so I just got out of there as fast as I could, ran all the way down and back onto the main road, and went to my mate's on foot. I know I should have taken the number plate, ID number, etc., called the police even when I was in the cab, let alone after it happened. However, I was a 17-year-old with a bottle of Jack Daniels in my bag, on the way to a party with all my mates drinking in a Muslim country with a drinking age of 21. The paranoia of the trouble from that was enough to keep it quiet from the authorities, although I did tell every family member and friend. So yeah, if I could never meet you and your little minibus posse again, that would be great. My mom was about 8 when this happened, so it was the mid-70s. This happened in a small rural town in Canada, so stranger danger wasn't a big thing there. My mom was leaving school, and an older, dirty-looking man pulled up in a beat-up old sedan, and he told her that he knew her parents and that they had asked him to pick her up. Side note about my step-grandfather. He was an alcoholic, abusive asshole who hung around a bunch of equally slimy losers, and my mom tried to avoid him and his friends as much as possible, so it didn't seem odd to her that she didn't recognize a friend of her parents. She got in his car and was completely oblivious to the fact that something was wrong as he started driving, because he was headed towards her house. In retrospect, though, she said it made sense that he took that route, because her house was right near the edge of town on a fairly secluded road, so he was taking a route out of town that avoided the more populated areas. He approached my mom's home, and my grandma happened to be standing out in the front yard gardening. My mom piped up, assuming that he was about to pull up in front of her house and let her out. She hadn't said a word up to that point. She was a quiet kid, and said thank you. The driver, confused, looked over at her and followed her gaze to the woman standing in the lawn in front of them. Since it was a pretty remote road that didn't get much traffic, my grandma glanced up at the approaching car. She saw my mom in the car and met eyes with the driver. Knowing that he had been seen by my grandmother and could be fairly easily identified, he decided to stop the car and let my mom out, and sped off out of town. My mom remembers my grandma collapsing on the lawn in a fit of tears, freaking out, and my mom being completely oblivious to the very real danger she'd just been in. Thank goodness my grandma liked gardening.